in my 20s, I was in graduate school to become a social worker, and I was living in Baltimore. And I met a fellow classmate, and she was just so amazing to me. She had this magnetic personality and this larger-than-life smile, and she somehow drew you in, just made you feel like you were part of her special world. Like, for example, we had an evening class. It was the summer, and there wasn't air conditioning. We were kind of tired and sleepy, like a 3-hour class. She passes this note over to me. She's wearing a long skirt. And we're in our 20s, we're not children. And this note says, "I'm not wearing any underwear." And I'm just like, okay, I can't laugh. Just funny little crazy things like that. And so our friendship grew to the point that we decided we wanted to be housemates. And so when we went to sort of inspect the row house in Baltimore, I should have known then that we had some really different approaches to how we organize things. So where I was like, "Oh, look, there's 4 rooms. We could have more people over." She was like, "I see the cover on that light socket isn't on properly. I'm sure that's not up to code." Or, "There's a little crack between the floor and the wall. That will have to be sealed before we could possibly sign a lease." But we did move in together, and we had a wonderful time for several months. And then some of my natural tendencies to kind of be a slob started to emerge. And it started with me baking some chocolate chip cookies, which I love to bake. But the pan was kind of crusty, and I needed to soak it overnight before I could wash it. And we did take turns doing the dishes. It was my turn, so I let it go for a day or two before she kind of politely raised the issue. "Sherri, I noticed that you haven't scrubbed that pan." It's like, "Oh, well, it did need to soak, and those cookies were really good, weren't they?" And I went off to class. And several more days passed. And by maybe 4 or 5 days, she cornered me before breakfast one morning, and I was like, "Sherri, I think we need to talk. Do you think there might be something deeper going on?" And I said, I said, "You know, I was the youngest of 5 children, and maybe I am a little bit spoiled." I said, but what about you and your need for things to always be so tidy?" She said, "I did have to sort of be perfect to earn my father's approval. And it was time for class, so I took off without doing the dishes. And I went down the sidewalk just thinking, what a wonderful friend. We had these deep, meaningful, rich conversations where we really understand each other's inner psyche." And a few days went by, and the weekend came and went, and I went away for the weekend. The dishes still weren't done. By the time I got back, it was probably 10 days. Other dishes and pots and pans had piled up. And when Wendy went off, she was like, "You don't respect me." And I was like, "It's not about you at all. I just kind of didn't get around to it. Sorry, I'll do it." She's like, "No, you don't understand. If you really cared about me, you would have done this because you care about how I feel. You're just doing this to avoid my anger." And I was like, is this a trick question? I didn't quite understand the difference. And, I went and did the dishes, whatever, no big deal. But the next day when I got home from class, her things were being loaded into a van. And she moved out. And I never talked to her again. And it's been like 30 years. And I was like trying to call her and leave messages at her house, and she just didn't respond. And I learned a big life lesson. Something sunk in for me. And still to this day, about every 2 weeks, I think of her when I put the money out on the countertop for my housekeeper.